But go ahead and go to 1 Kings chapter 16 tonight. 1 Kings chapter 16. Something that's interesting whenever we're reading the Bible, whenever you're reading through the historical books, it's frustrating as you're reading through Judges, let's say. You know, the period of the time of Judges was roughly like 400 years. And so that's a long time. But when you're reading through it, you're reading through it really quick. And it's just like in Israel again, they didn't follow the Lord. They start worshiping idols. It's like, when are they going to learn their lessons? And it's the same thing too as we're going through the kings. These kings just never learn their lesson. And you know, one of the things that you've heard this before, and it's worth repeating, but one of the things we learn from history is that we never learn from history. We just, for some reason, are not good at looking forward into the future, and what will help us see in the future is look back in the past, see what's worked, see what's hurt. And Israel absolutely did not do this. And as I've been going through this, studying all this, I'm just amazed at how similar the mistakes are that these people would make. And the thing about what we've covered here so far, it's not been a super long period of time. And yet the same mistakes keep getting made over and over again. And something else too, as we go through this, and I'm going to keep kind of hitting on this just for my benefit, if anyone else's, but I'm trying to pay extra close attention and help us get to know these characters and to remember the individuals, remember the order of the kings. I'm trying to get all this sorted out in my brain real good because it helps a lot when you're studying the major and the minor prophets if you understand who the kings were at that time. Because it always tells us, you know, in the days of Ahaz or in the days of Jotham or whatever. And so that right there, that should help you understand those prophecies a lot better if you understand what's going on. So we are going to take time to just kind of point out names and just kind of help do some things to hopefully help us remember them. But last week we looked at the very brief reign of Abijah or Abijam and Asa in Judah. Abijam was only like 3 years. Asa, he was king for a long time. But also we have the very brief reign of Nadab on the northern kingdom. Nadab was the son of Jeroboam. He ends up getting overthrown by Baasha from the tribe of Issachar. So the line of Jeroboam is already gone. You had Jeroboam and then you had Nadab. That's it. Now we've got Baasha that comes along. And so again, the names can get confusing because they're often similar and sometimes the same. So on the southern kingdom, we've had Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, and Asa. In the northern kingdom, Jeroboam, Nadab, and now Baasha. And so in verse 1, it says, "Then the word of the Lord came to Jehu, the son of Hanani, against Baasha, saying." Now, I want everybody to make a note of this. This Jehu is not the Jehu that you're probably thinking of, the one who drove furiously, the one who was involved when had the eunuchs throw Jezebel out of the tower. We're going to be looking at him. That was Jehu, the son of Jephunneh. We'll be looking at him pretty soon. He will become one of the kings in the northern kingdom. This is a different Jehu. This is Jehu the prophet. So we have Jehu the prophet, and later we'll have Jehu the king. So we're talking about Jehu the prophet right now, prophesying against Baasha. And often when we look at the prophets in the Bible, typically they were a prophet for a certain kingdom. For example, you know, Elijah and Elisha, they were mainly prophets for the northern kingdom, and they were always prophesying negative things towards those guys. And so it's always important that you understand who they're prophesying to, whether it's the northern kingdom, whether it's the southern kingdom. Sometimes they're prophesying against another kingdom somewhere else. And always remember that when you're reading those prophecies to help keep it in context. So Jehu prophesying against the northern kingdom. Baasha, we saw last week, he did evil. And who did he do evil like? Like Jeroboam. Jeroboam goes and does all these wicked things. God tells him, "You're done. I'm not going to preserve you. You and all of your seed are going to die." And then Baasha comes along. "I'm going to do the same thing Jeroboam did." It doesn't make sense, but that's exactly what happened. And he says, "For as much as I exalted thee out of the dust, and made thee prince over my people Israel, and thou hast walked in the way of Jeroboam, and hast made my people Israel to sin, to provoke me to anger with their sins, Behold, I will take away the posterity of Baasha and the posterity of his house, and will make thy house like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. He's like, you know what I'm going to do to you, Baasha? Since you did the same thing Jeroboam did, I'm going to do the same thing to you that I did to him. It kind of makes sense. And it says, him that dieth of Baasha in the city shall the dogs eat, and him that dieth of his in the fields shall the fowls of the air eat. Now the rest of the acts of Baasha and what he did and his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles in the kings of Israel? And we should always expect that if we do the same wicked things that the wicked does, that we will have the same outcome. Even if you're saved, understand, we are, as saved people, we are preserved from hell. We are preserved from eternal destruction, but we are not preserved from trials and troubles and punishment on this earth. Not even close. We absolutely can have the same problems that the lost people do. It says in 2 Peter 2:4, it says, for if God spared not the angels that sin, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those after should live ungodly. So all those stories that we have in the Bible of destruction and judgment as a result of sin, God gave us those stories and God destroyed these places so we would learn not to do those things. Meaning that the same thing could happen to you. You will be destroyed. You will come to ruin. And when we read stories in the Bible where people do terrible sins and there's terrible consequences, you know what we're supposed to do? We're supposed to look at those stories and say, God's not pleased with that. If God came down on Israel like that, he's going to come down on me. Look how hard God came down on David, a man after his own heart. Think about that. You know how many preachers have used David as like cover for their wickedness? They sinned, like, well, David sinned. Yeah, and God came down on him like a ton of bricks. And you are invoking David, meaning I shouldn't have any consequences. Well, that doesn't make any sense. God came down on David hard. It's horrible what David had to go through, all of his children that he lost. And so, it's crazy. I've heard preachers justify restoring perverts to the pulpit, and it's like, no. Listen, you want nothing to happen to this guy. That's not the precedent that God set in the Scriptures. No, when you do wicked things, you should expect terrible things to happen to you. And sure enough, Baasha does exactly what Jeroboam did, and the exact same thing is going to happen. And we're going to keep seeing this pattern. It's like, you almost feel like, okay, we get the point. How many times do you have to show us this? Well, again, unfortunately, if God thinks it's important to emphasize over and over again the Scripture, we should probably pay attention to it. Because we need to learn it, and guess what? We still don't learn these lessons sometimes. It's sad, but it goes on to say, so Baasha slept with his fathers and was buried in Tirzah, and Elah, his son, reigned in his stead. And also by the hand of the prophet Jehu, the son of Hanani, came the word of the Lord against Baasha and against his house, for all the evil that he did in the sight of the Lord, in provoking him to anger with the work of his hands, in being like the house of Jeroboam, and because he killed him. And isn't it interesting too? It's like, okay, well, Jeroboam and his house, they were wicked. So on one hand, it almost seems like a good idea, somebody coming along, killing him, and starting over. The problem is he's doing the exact same thing. And isn't that frustrating too in politics? When one politician defeats the previous one, he defeats the incumbent and then does all the same stuff. You know, it almost makes you think one person is really in charge. It's probably not the Jews, it's probably the devil. Okay? And that's the reality. It's probably just the devil. It says, in the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Elah, the son of Baasha, to reign over Tirzah 2 years. And his servant Zimri, captain of half his chariots, conspired against him as he was in Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, steward of the house in Tirzah. And Zimri went in and smote him and killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his stead. Notice Zimri, how he comes into power exactly the way Baasha came into power. Baasha, he conspires against Nadab, defeats him, overthrows him. And so then we have the son of Baasha. He's a king, and obviously he's not a good guy. What's he doing? He's just partying it up, drinking himself drunk, not paying attention to what's going on. Zimri comes along and overthrows him. And I'm sure, Zimri probably told himself, hey, this drunkard king's not accomplished anything. It's better for the kingdom if I take over. But obviously this isn't the way to do it. And Zimri is going to be evil, and we're going to see he's going to do the same stuff. So again, they all keep doing the same thing. And so Elah here, he's not just an innocent victim suffering from the sin of his father. He was wicked too. Again, God condemned Baasha and his house. But what we see this constantly with the kings, and we'll see it again, and even in Judah, we see where God never destroyed Judah. God always preserved that line of David because of his promise. But God often prophesied major judgments on that kingdom. God prophesied judgment and destruction on Judah during the days of Hezekiah. But Hezekiah got right with the Lord, and God spared that generation that judgment. The judgment did not go away, but it did not come in the days of Hezekiah. It did not come during the days of a righteous king. And whenever judgment would be pronounced on a nation, on a family, on a house, anytime a generation that would rise up and get right, that generation never would suffer that fate. God always waited until another generation came along who did like their fathers. So we never see just the innocent, godly generation suffering as a result. No, God would give revival during those times. And so Elah, again, it's not just because of his father. He's wicked too, drinking himself drunk, and he dies. And so now we've got Zimri who's king. And it says, and it came to pass when he began to reign, as soon as he sat on his throne, that he slew all the house of Baasha. He left not one that pisseth against the wall, neither of his kinsfolk nor of his friends. Thus did Zimri destroy all the house of Baasha, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake against Baasha by Jehu the prophet, for all the sins of Baasha, and the sins of Elah his son, which they sinned, and by which they made Israel to sin, in provoking the Lord God of Israel to anger with their vanities. Now the rest of the acts of Elah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So notice, again, just like Jeroboam's line got wiped out, Baasha's line gets wiped out. And the thing is, what these kings did not realize they were doing is every time they would follow this practice of just wiping out the line like that, while it definitely would have helped them preserve their spot, during their time, they were also setting up the future generations for trouble, because this is the precedent. What do you do when a new king comes along? You kill everybody else in the previous king's family so they don't rise up. And it's just like you're basically condemning your whole line. If these guys would have been smart, they'd have been like, you know what? The day might come where my family loses power. And it'd be nice if my line would survive, if we could survive as a people. You know what? I'm going to show mercy. He was a drunk king. He was good for nothing. But, we'll at least send him away. We'll exile him or something like that. And at least they can survive. But no, they didn't even do that. They would just wipe him out. And they would kill him. And this is just a very wicked practice. And it was something that evil people did. This was something that the heathen kings would often do. And so, in verse 15, and so I want to point this out too, because I want you to keep this in mind, and we're going to get into something here too a little bit later, that again, I like to make life application and stuff, but sometimes it's good to just pay attention to the facts of the Bible, because there are some lessons we can learn from that. There's also things too we're going to come up on later that people will often say are contradictions, that are not contradictions. We just are not accounting for things the way they did in the Bible. We have a different mindset today. And so when we look at some of these things in the Bible, they look like contradictions to us, but they're not. So first off, I want you to keep this in mind. On David's line, we've had David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Asa, and Abijah. We're 5 generations, and it's going to keep going because of God's promise to David. In the northern kingdom, there's so much instability. We've had one family, Jeroboam and Nadab, only made it 2 generations. And then we had another family, Baasha and Elah, only 2 generations. And then we have Zimri, and he's not going to last long at all. 3rd family. And then we're going to go into this chapter into Omri, the 4th family. Now, Omri is important because, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. We don't think about him much. He's not talked about much, but it's important that we understand what's going on. The northern kingdom keeps changing leaders, keeps changing headquarters. It's not really getting firmly established as a nation. And this is another foreign concept to us. You and I, we do not understand very much how like the birth of a nation works, how a kingdom is formed. And as Americans, we have a very goofy mindset when it comes to these things. For example, Russia attacking this sovereign nation, Ukraine, right? But how long has Ukraine even been around? It's not even been a thing for that long, has it? The reality is, has Russia ever really accepted the fact that Ukraine was a sovereign nation? Now, a lot of people did. But what nations have to do typically when they form, they have to show they have a form of government. It actually needs to work for a while. It needs to have some strength. It needs to last. And the longer it lasts, the more they thrive as a people, the more adversity they face and battles they win, the more it confirms to everybody, this is its own sovereign nation, we'll leave it alone. And then we also have in Israel, you've got Israel, that somebody shared a Facebook post to me today. A guy's like, Israel is about to turn 77. That's 2 sevens, and they were like all excited about it. And one guy left a comment, it's like we're about to check out of here or something like that. And it's like, wow, okay. But anyway, the thing is, Israel has never even fully established itself. Now, if you ask America, it has. It has in 1948. Several countries would say that, but a lot of countries, they don't recognize that. You have the Palestinians that some people say, well, they're not even really a people. They don't even really have a government or anything like that. And the reality is, with the Palestinians, they don't have a very clear form of government. They don't really have a lot of clear laws and established leaderships and all that. And a lot of it's because the Israelis messing with them. But again, there are nations and places that have been around for a long time, but they've never fully established themselves as a people, as a nation, as a form of government. And so understand, when it comes to kings, whenever they would come along, that was basically the start of a new government. And as long as that nation stayed under that family's rule, that basically showed that kingdom lasted a long time. For example, the Babylonian kingdom. Okay? That was one kingdom. The Bible sees that as one kingdom. Prophetically, it was one kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. But historically, you had Nebuchadnezzar, evil Merodach, you had Belshazzar, that were all kings in that line. But the Bible sees it as one king. And then you have the Medes and Persians. And the thing is, there were several kings in those lines, but it was one kingdom. Y'all understand how that works. And that's where the preterists get wrong on the 7 kings of Revelation. 5 are fallen and 1 is. They're looking at one kingdom and looking at all the different successors. No, that's one kingdom. That was one kingdom, one empire, one form of government, just different Caesars that they had within there. That only counts as one king in the way that God accounts for these things. And so keep all that in mind. In reality, with Zimri, we're kind of on the 4th kingdom, in that northern kingdom. The 4th king that comes along, even though there's been more individuals than that. But that's how the Bible accounts for things. That's how they accounted for things back then. And some of that's going to come into play later, Matt. I know that's a lot of technical details, but I'm telling you, it's going to help you understand some things later on. And so these kings so far haven't made it more than 2 generations. They've not even made it more than 2 generations. And so it says in verse 15, and in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, did Zimri reign 7 days in Tirzah. And the people were encamped against Gibbethon, which belongeth to the Philistines. And the people that were encamped heard say, Zimri hath conspired, and also slain the king. Wherefore all Israel made Omri the captain of the host, king over Israel that day in the camp. And Omri went up from Gibbethon, and all Israel with him, and they besieged Tirzah. And it came to pass, when Zimri saw that the city was taken, that he went into the palace of the king's house, and burnt the king's house over him with fire, and died. For his sins which he had sinned in doing evil in the sight of the Lord, and walking in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sin which he did to make Israel to sin. Now the rest of the acts of Zimri and his treason that he wrought, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? Now let's talk about Zimri a few minutes. 7 days he was king. I hope you enjoyed those 7 days. That did not last very long at all. But first off, I want to point out how this right here is a reminder too of how 1st and 2nd Kings, it focuses more on the northern kingdom, because we don't even see Zimri mentioned in Chronicles. Okay, and so just as in some of the stories we see in Chronicles aren't in Kings, it's typically ones involving Judah. Some of the stories that are in Kings we don't see in Chronicles because it's focusing on Israel, the northern kingdom. In reality, whenever we see these references in Kings to Judah, it's just kind of footnotes because there was a lot of interacting between those two kingdoms. And when you're seeing Israel mentioned in Chronicles, it's just kind of footnotes in their history. But I want to talk about Zimri's cowardly move. Now, the Bible does not tell us everything that was going on in his head. Okay? But right here is an example of a suicide in the Bible. There's not a lot of suicides in the Bible, but there are some. And typically, every time you see suicide in the Bible, it's a very cowardly move that somebody is doing. And in reality, suicide is, I believe, and you feel bad talking about it because everybody knows somebody who has committed suicide, but it is one of the most cowardly and selfish things that a human being can do. A person who commits suicide had one person on their mind when they did it. They had themselves on their mind. It's a terrible thing to do. And so with Zimri, I think we can assume a few things about him. First off, his kingdom was not obtained in a legitimate way. Okay? And notice it was in Tirzah, in the palace there where he burned it down. Well, that was where Baasha and Elah reigned from. So this wasn't even something that he built. This wasn't something that he had accomplished for himself. This was something he stole in an illegitimate way. And the reality is, if this had been something he had actually built, something he would have worked on, he probably wouldn't have been as anxious to just burn it down. He probably would have actually fought for it till the death. But no, it was something that he didn't do any work for. And in his mind, it's like, you know what? I'm going to lose. And if I can't have this place, nobody can have it. And that's often what people do whenever they know, and whenever they know they've lost everything, they're going to take everything with them. And that's why, too, you often hear about a lot of these murder-suicide things where, parents, before they kill themselves, or dad, before he kills himself, will kill all the children, kill his wife, things like that. They're just going to destroy everything. Often, too, when people, they know they're going to lose on something, whether it be in politics, it's like, if I'm going down, I'm taking everybody with me. Because I got busted for corruption, but you all are corrupt too. I'm taking you all down with me. And then what happens? They get Epsteined. Isn't that usually what happens? Whenever that bad person gets exposed, they're going to take everybody down with them. That's their attitude. Whenever a pastor destroys his ministry and shows that he's a fraud, I'm just going to burn it all down. That's kind of the attitude. It's the same thing that we see going on here with Zimri. If I can't have it, nobody can have it. I'm burning it all down. And that's why, too, when it comes to things like suicide, if you're ever suspicious of anybody, man, do something about it. Call the police. Do something. I had a weirdo sending me some crazy text the other day that nobody that goes to church or anything like that, but it concerned me greatly. And it sounded very threatening, kind of what he was saying about his family and stuff like that. And they were in another state, but I called the cops and I was like, hey, can you all go do a wellness check on this family? Because this is real. It was very threatening what they were saying. And I knew this person was crazy and everything was falling apart in his life. And as a result of that, I was afraid he was going to do something like that. And most people, they don't, when they're like this guy, they don't just kill themselves. They take everything down with them. And you got to watch out for that kind of thing. And when you commit suicide, just understand too, it's like, well, I don't know that that's how he felt. Well, here's the thing. When you commit suicide, everybody's going to make their own judgments. Because guess what? You're not around to tell your story. So everybody's just going to assume whatever. You have absolutely destroyed your legacy. And maybe part of why he burned everything down and killed himself too, he probably too was afraid of what he was going to face with the enemy. He might have thought that facing the enemy would be worse than burning to death. But I personally think he just thought, if I can't have it, nobody can. And so while suicide is a horrible thing, it's tragic, we do need to understand there's nothing honorable in it. It's not an honorable thing. It's a shame, and it should be treated as such. It's a very selfish thing to do. One of the worst things we can do to all the living is whenever somebody commits suicide, to treat them like a hero. Because then that other young person, when they're going through something, when they're facing some kind of battle, when they feel like they failed in some area, they're going to think, well, here's one way I can be a hero. No, we can't. So we don't want to be cruel to the dead or anything like that. But you shouldn't honor something that shameful that somebody does. And it is a very shameful thing. And so, verse 21, back to 1 Kings 16, says, "Then were the people of Israel divided into two parts. Half of the people followed Tibni, the son of Ganath, to make him king, and half followed Omri." So things are very unstable in Israel. So they've been their own separate kingdom for a long time now. I've lost track of the years, but things are very unstable. It says, "But the people that followed Omri prevailed against the people that followed Tibni, the son of Ganath, so that Tibni died and Omri reigned." And so it becomes clear that the last thing you want in Israel is to come to power. Because this pretty much just makes everyone want to take you out. And everybody wants to be the new king. And because things were so unstable, it just caused a lot of wicked people to want to pursue that throne. And wicked and selfish leaders, they always are going to feel the need to just destroy anyone they see as any type of threat to their empire. That's what they did. And so when Omri, who has seen all these previous kings die, seen all their families die, you've got to know that when he's reigning in Israel, he's going to know the kind of nation that he's ruling over, and he's just going to kill anyone who is a threat to him. That's how he's going to be. And so Omri is now reigning, and it's important that we understand a few things. Again, it's going to be important later, because while a kingdom can become a thing in a single day, it can take years, decades, and even centuries for that kingdom to become established in a way that causes it to be recognized as legitimate. That's one of the things, too, that's amazing about America. America, we were under rule of England. We had a king over us as a nation, and there was a rebellion, and of course that resulted in a war. That resulted in the Revolutionary War that we won, and it was a hard-fought war, but we won it, and then we went on to thrive as a nation, and it's never really been called in question since. Nobody questions the legitimacy of America. Why? Because we are a strong nation. We have a strong military. We have a strong economy. And the reality is, too, it's because, too, we have, as a nation, I believe one of the reasons we've been so strong is because we have been a predominantly Christian nation for a very long time. And as a result of that, we've had strong families. And when you have good families and you have a good form of government, that is a recipe for greatness. Now, they've been doing everything they can for a long time to destroy that. While we bring in everybody from every part of the world, while we bring Muslims into this world, while we bring just all these false religions into this world, while we allow depravity to thrive here, while we allow sodomites to be celebrated, we're going to lose that eventually. We're seeing it deteriorate, but again, it's pretty amazing just how fast our nation became a thing and became a world power. That really is historically unprecedented in many ways for a kingdom, for a nation to come into power and to be as strong as ours in a couple hundred years. But Again, we're definitely on the road to losing it. There's no doubt. But this northern kingdom, it has been very shaky for its entire existence. The kingdom has changed families 4 times now. It keeps changing tribes. It keeps changing headquarters. It's always changing. And so while the name Omri is not well known, while it's not talked about much, it's important that we understand Omri, like David in many ways, is the beginning of many things in Israel's kingdom. For example, David, while he was the second king of Israel, he was the first king to reign from Jerusalem, where Jerusalem would become the headquarters and the capital of Israel at that time, but then later of the kingdom of Judah, where when Saul was king, he was from the tribe of Benjamin. He reigned in a different place. But Jerusalem ended up becoming the established capital. Judah was the main tribe that was established as leader in the southern kingdom. So far, we have nothing like that in the northern kingdom, but it's about to start happening in a way in the northern kingdom with the line of Omri. And one of the things that we're going to see later on too, just as we often refer to Jerusalem when talking about Judah or the tribe of Judah, we're also going to start hearing Ephraim referred to a lot, because Ephraim is going to kind of become the capital area for the northern kingdom, and specifically Samaria. Samaria is going to kind of become the capital place. And so just as in what will happen eventually, just as eventually those under the southern kingdom of Judah were known as Jews, later on those from the northern kingdom will be known as Samaria, or Samaritans way into the future. Now, why is that? Again, don't want to get ahead of myself in the history, but when the Assyrians come in, they're going to bring in people from all these other countries that are going to dwell on that land. And then during the Greek Empire, everything gets all intermixed, and then we have the Samaritans that they hate in the New Testament. So again, all of that, so that's a lot of history that I'm covering just a few sentences there. But things are starting to kind of take shape in a way for the northern kingdom under Omri's reign. Ephraim is about to become kind of like Judah is to the southern kingdom. So in verse 23, in the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, began Omri to reign over Israel. 12 years, 6 years reigned he in Tirzah. And he bought the hill Samaria of Shemer for 2 talents of silver, and built on the hill, and called the name of the city which he built after the name of Shemer, owner of the hill, Samaria. So again, just as Jerusalem, which is in the land of Judah, was capital of the southern kingdom, from here on out, Samaria is going to become the capital for the northern kingdom. And it's important too for a nation, for them to have kind of that capital, to kind of have a headquarters, to kind of have a place, a seat of government and a place where people can come to. That matters a lot as a people. For example, in America, it used to be Philadelphia was kind of our nation's headquarters and things, but later it moved to Washington, D.C. And it's just kind of something that you have to do as an American, where you have to go to D.C. sometime and just, see all the cool buildings and all these monuments and things that they've built for our country. And it makes us look good as a nation to a certain extent. It shows some strength. It also shows who's really in charge. Freemasons. All right, but that's another story for another day. But that stuff's all on purpose. Okay? That's why they do all those things. Okay, how many's been to D.C.? And it's a cool place to visit. It's got cool buildings and things, but it is helpful for our nation to have something like that, to just kind of have that headquarters, and they've just not really had that. They've not had that in the northern kingdom. Things have been, they've been too shaky. And so verse 25, and it says, but Omri wrought evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did worse than all that were before him. Now, again, this is a guy not learning from history. I mean, it is going bad. Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri. What do they all have in common? Them and all their families are gone. They cease to exist. Why? Because of the evil. The prophets told them why they were being judged. They told them why all these things are happening. Omri comes along. He's like, I'm going to do worse than all of them. I'm going to do worse. And he did worse. And it says, for he walked in the way of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and in his sin, wherewith he made Israel to sin, to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger with their vanities. Now the rest of the acts of Omri, which he did in his might that he showed, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Omri slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, and Ahab, his son, reigned in his stead. And we are all familiar with Ahab. So Ahab, while we know him, he is the son of Omri. He is the second in the dynasty of Omri. Remember that. Keep all that in mind. And Omri was worse than all the kings before him, like Jeroboam. And now we've got Ahab, who's going to outdo Omri. Ahab's going to be so bad that after Ahab, it's not the kings were like Jeroboam. No, the kings, they were like Ahab. We've got a new low. It would be like if all of a sudden somebody came along that was like worse than Hitler, and then they all got compared to that guy. You know, and like, let's just say for 2 seconds that the liberals are right about Trump. Okay, if what the liberals were saying was true about Trump, 50 years from now, everybody will be comparing everybody who's evil to Trump, rather than Hitler. He's kind of the evil name that everybody likes to throw out. And so in Israel's day, during this time, it was always Jeroboam. He was like Jeroboam. But then Ahab comes along, and you know what? Jeroboam, he was probably in hell thinking, man, I'm glad I'm not the one everybody's talking about now. I'm glad it's Ahab. And you know, one of these days, you know, Hitler's probably hoping somebody's going to come along and like dethrone him as just the most evil name that's out there. Of course, I'm sure he's not aware of that, but just in my mind, that's what I picture. So anyway, look at what it says in verse 29. Because Omri didn't. Omri also, because he didn't learn from the other kings. But here's another thing about Omri. Because notice too, it mentioned his might. Omri was a strong king. He was an evil king, but he had strength. He established his kingdom. He strengthened it. That's something we've not really been seeing much with the other kings. And he died while things were relatively good for him, where nothing really bad had happened. But that's typically what we would see whenever judgment would come and be prophesied against these kings. It was typically in their children's day when things happened. Now, we don't see the prophet speaking to Omri, but we are going to see the prophet speaking to Ahab. And Ahab will definitely receive some judgment, and I'm looking forward to getting to those chapters. But it says, and in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab, the son of Omri, to reign over Israel. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. So, I mean, we have been seeing just evil king after evil king. And then Omri comes along. He was even worse than everybody before him. Ahab comes along. He was even worse than that. It just keeps on going downhill. They keep getting more wicked. It says, and it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And remember, Jeroboam, him making those two golden calves, that was pretty evil. Setting up this fake worship. Setting up priests of the lowest of the people. All of these things, God said he did that to provoke him to anger. And so think about this. You think about all the horrible stuff that Jeroboam did. And it's like, you know, and if you think that's bad, if that was a light thing, listen to what Ahab did that was like the worst thing that he did. And notice it says that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. So notice, again, him taking a woman from the Zidonians, which were another evil people. God would often refer to their gods as like the abomination of the Zidonians and people. And what's interesting about the Bible, a lot of times it refers to certain groups in just the most evil of terms. But the Bible does not always tell us the specifics about what they did that was so bad, that was so satanic. And I think that is by design. There is a reason God would often tell Israel to just go and destroy everything. You know why? Not only did God want them dead, God wanted the memory of them to be forgotten. You know why? Because if we remembered what these people did, you know what? We would probably repeat those things. And so it was there. The reality is some of these kingdoms that Israel was fighting with, dealing with, intermarrying with, we probably have no idea how wicked they were. It's probably hard for us to imagine. And so when you see Ahab taking the daughter of one of their kings, that was just a very foolish thing to do. They were not supposed to do that, and especially as kings they weren't supposed to do that. Why? Because they would serve their gods, and Ahab is now serving Baal. And he reared up the altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria, and Ahab made a grove, and Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him. So think about it. This is Israel. These are the people that God had chosen, that God had brought out of the wilderness, that God put into the promised land, that God gave a temple to. And what are they doing? They're building a temple to Baal. They're a full-blown Baal-worshiping kingdom. And it really is amazing that God did not just completely wipe them out at this point. But God was merciful. And so we've now been introduced to Jezebel. She is a very well-known character. And so first thing, notice it was a wicked thing for Ahab to marry her. And she's not even a Jew. She's not somebody that he should have been marrying. And we're going to see her, basically she starts taking over things in Israel. And obviously she is going to do the wrong thing. Like all foreign wives, they always brought their false gods. Think about it. If women like this messed up Solomon, what do you think they're going to do to somebody as wicked as Ahab? It's going to be way worse. And so there can only be one possible end for Ahab. After every one of these, if God does not judge Ahab, he's got to apologize to Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, and Omri. Because he was more wicked than all of them. And it says, in his days did Hiel the Bethelite build Jericho. He laid the foundation thereof in Abiram his firstborn, and set up the gates thereof of his youngest son Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by Joshua, the son of Nun. And it's interesting how it throws us in, but this is one more evil thing they did during Ahab's day. They went and started rebuilding Jericho. Remember, kids, too, we just talked about Achan, who took of the accursed thing. And remember, that was Jericho that he took things from. Everything there was accursed. They weren't supposed to touch any of it. It was all supposed to be destroyed. And in Joshua 6:26, this is hundreds of years before, over 500 years, I believe, before, it says, and Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, cursed be the man before the Lord that riseth up and buildeth this city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn, and in his youngest son shall he set up the gates of it. And that's exactly what happened to this man. When the man who decided he was going to build it, God killed his firstborn. God does not, and you know what? So that was a long time ago. God doesn't forget his prophecies. I remember as a kid, sometimes my dad would say, you're not allowed to do this anymore. And sometimes we would hope a lot of time would pass and he would forget about that rule. And maybe we could get away with it later. And sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't. But you know what? God does not forget the things that he said. God does not forget the judgments that he's going to pronounce. And even though hundreds and hundreds of years have passed, God remembered what he said. And sure enough, just as was prophesied in Joshua's day, it came during the days of Ahab. And so something very interesting, again, about some of these Canaanite cities. Again, Jericho. What all was going on there? It's really, the Bible does not tell us. When we, for example, too, when you read about the groves and things, it's like, what does that mean exactly? I mean, is it wrong to have a grove of trees? Okay, now I think we can safely assume the problem was the purpose of these groves. That they were something they would build for their gods. They were probably beautiful places. Maybe too, this is kind of what I picture in my mind. I picture these groves of trees that were probably in like different designs and shapes and had different symbols and stuff. You say, well, what do you think the symbols are? I think those things have been destroyed and forgotten, because guess what? If the Bible would have described the shape or the symbol, guess what all the Satanists would be using? They would be using that. So the ones that, there's probably many things like that too. There's probably a lot of really satanic things that went on in these places. Obviously, too, there's even powers that we see some of these people had. I'm not trying to get into weird, spooky stuff, but folks, Egypt, those false prophets in Egypt, they were doing some pretty amazing miracles. They're turning staffs into serpents. Think about some of the stuff that was going on. There was definitely stuff that they knew about back then that was very evil, very satanic, and I believe God wanted all those things destroyed for a reason. And I'm telling you, it's like you read some of these stories, and sometimes you look and it's like, wow, that seems a little bit harsh. Really, we're wiping out everybody, women and children, even the animals and stuff. What's going on here? Well, while it might seem harsh to you, just understand that if God would have disclosed all the details of why, all it would do is inspire more wickedness today. And so I think it's a good thing that the Bible does not explain what these things were like. But either way, it is interesting. And when we see the way God spoke of them, it is something that we don't really want to know. We don't need to know about these satanic things. I think everybody needs to be careful. You know, I remember when I was younger and I was a teenager, I was always interested in some of the stuff about, you know, like demon possession and all that kind of stuff. And I remember reading all the anybody ever read the chick tracts on that stuff and some of those like comic books they had? I was fascinated with that stuff as a kid. And I remember my dad warning me, he's like, you got to be careful. Don't look into that stuff too much. But it was after I got married, I bought the book Lucifer to Throne by Charles Chinquy. And they were always referring to that book in those. I got so freaked out by that book. I was reading it at home by myself one night. I got so scared reading that book that I remember I was home by myself and I was like, I don't even want to lay down and go to sleep right now. I was home by myself, and Cassandra, she was away with the kids but was on her way home. And so I just stayed up and I kept reading. So I could like stay awake until she got home. I was just freaked out by that. And I was like, yeah, maybe there's some of this stuff we're just better off not knowing about. We're just remaining innocent about, because there's a lot of evil stuff out there. And so Jericho, again, it was so wicked. Even hundreds of years later, God killed the firstborn of the man who built the city. And so there's some things, there's some history that we should remember so we will never repeat it. But there's also some history that's so bad, I think it's better to be forgotten. And if we knew the details of some of the things Israel got involved in, it would probably just cause many people to rebel and participate in those things. And so there are some things that is better for us to not know about. Not all knowledge is power. And I believe the Bible's often silent on purpose about some of the wickedness that people like Jezebel were probably involved in. I think if we knew what it was really like and what she was really like, we would really be horrified. And if we knew exactly what Jezebel was involved in, guess what all the Hillarys and Rachel Maddows and Rosie O'Donnells would be doing? Exactly what they see, what the Bible would get specific on in there. That's what they would do. And so we're just better off not knowing. So anyway, I hope that kind of helps you understand some of the things there. And remember that line of Omri. We are in the family of Omri has taken over, and just keep that in mind as we go into some of the next chapters. So with that, let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this chapter. Help us to learn from it. Lord, I pray you'll help us to learn from history. I pray you'll help us to learn from history in our own nation as well as other nations, but especially the history that's been recorded in your word. Help us to try to get better. Help us to learn from the mistakes of others. Help us to learn from our family history, from church history. And Lord, it's so pointless to just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And I pray you'll help us to be good examples and set up the future generations for success. In your name we pray. Amen.